there's an idea among the non-religious that belief in God is somehow irrational or illogical, that it's purely emotional, it's purely faith, where they'll say faith is belief absent evidence. And I completely disagree with that. I was raised an atheist for 20 years. This is the argument that got me over the edge. I actually used to do what you might call counter-apologetics or atheist apologetics until I encountered this argument. And now I would call myself a Christian. So just a quick introduction. Every argument has some foundation, right? There's some worldview that you have when you're making an argument. The Transcendental Argument for God argues that foundation directly by saying that we can't actually make sense of the world at all without assuming God to begin with. And we'll get into the argument now. So the structure of the argument is like this. If X is required for Y and Y is true, then X must be true. So I'll give you a non-controversial example that everyone can agree with, just to show you that the form of the argument is valid, right? So the premises lead to the conclusion. So I call this the walking argument for legs. So legs are required for walking, and I'm walking, therefore I have legs, right? It's very obviously true that if I'm walking and I need legs to walk, then I must have legs. Now, the controversial part comes in with the transcendental argument for God. So we're going to plug in God is required for logic, and logic exists, therefore God exists. And you could put any transcendental category here. You could put the conscious experience. You could put identity over time. You could maybe put time and space itself. But for now, we'll go with logic. I think logic is the easiest one to argue. You could also put morality. That's a famous one. So we can see that the structure is valid even if you disagree with this first premise. This first premise is where all the argument happens. No one really disagrees that logic exists, and no one disagrees that these two premises lead to the conclusion, but they disagree that God is required for logic. So here would be my justification for that first premise. Logic must be universal and invariant. If it's not, it would mean that at some time or some place, 1 + 1 could be 3, or 4 × 4 could be 10, right? That's obviously not true. And logic wouldn't even have meaning if that was true. What could it mean for that to be true in different places, different times? You could have different logics. So logic must also be immaterial, right? Logic isn't something you can touch. Logic would be true if everything disappeared, all the material world disappeared. Logic isn't something you can find under a rock, so it can't be material. It's not made of matter. And the last one, and this is really the important one, is that logic is normatively binding. So what this means is that logic actually tells you what's right and wrong and what's correct and incorrect, right? It doesn't just describe things, it prescribes. So it sets a standard that you have to follow, otherwise you're actually wrong. And I would say that a purely material worldview can't ground these characteristics. I'll just go over 3 quick common objections. This video is not meant to be comprehensive. Some people will say that logic is just a human convention. I would call this some kind of psychologism, where they'll say logic is not construct of the mind. This actually destroys the idea of right and wrong completely. If logic is just a human convention, why should we follow it, right? Just because we feel like we have to doesn't mean it's true. The second objection would be that the transcendental argument for God is circular, which is true, and I admit that openly. All worldviews are circular at the foundational level, right? Obviously, I need to use logic to prove the foundation for logic. You couldn't get around that. But the point is that without God, your worldview can't justify what it claims to justify. I'm not saying the tag isn't circular. I'm saying that other worldviews are insufficient, even if they're also circular. So my circular worldview is better than your circular worldview. Here's the last one. Logic just is, right? They'll say that logic is some kind of brute fact of the universe. If this is true, you have 2 issues. The first one is that there's no justification for that claim, right? Unless you're going to say that logic is kind of self-justifying in the same way that God is self-justifying, but that would be an ad hoc fallacy where you're just attaching this label to logic, like justification, self-justifications, to get around the fact that logic has no justification under your worldview. The second problem is that it provides no normativity, right? Even if we agree that logic exists, why should I give a shit, basically? If you come to me and you say, oh, you're being illogical, why should I care if there's no arbiter telling me, if there's no one with authority telling me that there's actually a reason to be logical? Thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. I'd love to hear some feedback about this video. It was very hastily put together and it was just a super quick overview, so it wasn't meant to be comprehensive.